So good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the last afternoon of this capacity building hub in the COP24. We are very happy to have here the UN Environment, UNEP DTU, to explain their capacity building exercises. So I hand over to Miriam, and she will tell more about general introduction, and then we hear the presentations of the other colleagues from UNEP DTU, and then we have a discussion with Crispin, PCCP member, and me, so Matti Nummelin, the PCCP member. So Miriam, I hand over to you.
Thank you very much, Matti. Thank you to the organizers, to the Capacity Building Hub, for inviting us to do this presentation. We are from the UNEP DTU Partnership, as you said. It is a knowledge reference center based in Denmark at the Technical University of Denmark. We are a collaborating center to the UN Environment, and we work with a number of projects. We implement projects for them, but we also do science-based work that usually bases our capacity building work. So we have been working with capacity building in developing countries for over 25 years now, and with that knowledge and experience, we have done our capacity building framework. So when working with countries, we usually focus on two areas. One is the institutional aspect in countries. As you know, this is the area where many countries still need support to continuously build or develop their institutional arrangements, legal frameworks, and other organizational aspects like coordination mechanisms, etc. So we focus on that area. On the other aspect, we also focus on the individual capacity building. We help develop the skills, helping the understanding of new concepts and new issues emerging from this process of the COP decisions. So how we do that? We do through projects, usually global projects, including many countries. Criteria usually is to select countries to be geographically balanced. In some occasions, it responds to the interests of our donors with which countries they would like to work with. We also, as I said, back our capacity building work with research and guidance methodologies, toolbox, etc., to help hands-on training workshops in the countries. And at the same time, we also host, from the research side, PhD students, because we are connected to the university. We do research through them, in different topic areas that is of our interest. We work with energy, both sides of climate change mitigation adaptation, and we also have a specialized center on energy efficiency. So through these programs, we deliver our capacity building work, and this is also a process-based where we have a general overview mandates for the projects, and we go to consult with countries what their needs are to make country-tailored work programs based on their needs. And I think this is something that we are generally hearing from all entities doing capacity building. They started looking at needs and do their programs based on that, which is good. And that's something that countries have been asking for over the years, to focus on local needs rather than us going with a program and tell them what to do. So we are here to present 3 big projects we are currently doing with overall with more than 100 countries, let's say, in different topics. So first of all, we will have my colleague Anne Olof. She will talk about emissions adaptation scan report, which basically gives the scientific foundation for also to tell the countries to be more aware of science-based, and that gives the background and the foundation for our capacity interventions.
Thank you. So you can say to set the scene, I'm going to tell a little bit about two of the UN Environment's flagship reports on climate change that we are heavily involved in coordinating and producing. It's the emissions gap report, as Miriam mentioned, and the adaptation gap report. And we've been presenting both this year's, during these annual assessments on mitigation and adaptation respectively, and we've been presenting this year's reports here during the COP, both last week and this week. So if we start with the emissions gap report, it's really put together by all the teams with a good global balance. It's based on an assessment approach, so we don't do new analysis per se, but we try to give a good state of play on where we are in terms of emissions, where they're headed, where we should be going, and what we can go do to get there. So in that sense, the topics are very relevant also for this year's Tell-a-No dialogue, and we see a lot of interest in the reports. It came out, the emissions gap report came out 1 week before COP. We always do that to maximize the effect it has and to give people and parties a chance to look at the key messages before it actually comes out. And it had more than 4,000 media articles after 2 days. And was mentioned in the opening of the COP by several parties. What the emissions gap report focuses on is really to see what have countries promised in terms of reducing their emissions by 2030 in their nationally determined contributions, and where the science tells us we need to be in 2030 to have a likely chance of keeping temperature increase below 2 or 1.5 degrees. And is there a difference between the two? And that's basically the emissions gap. So it's the difference between what countries are promising and where we need to be in 2030. And what we see every year is that there is a huge gap. And this year the report was significantly informed by all the studies that were made available in the context of the new special report on global warming 1.5 degrees by the IPCC. So this year we were able to base the assessment on 85 scenarios, whereas last year we only had 16 available. And it made a huge difference in terms of the gap with respect to 1.5 degrees, because it provided a lot of additional information and much more granularity of the scenarios. So basically the main thing coming out from that informed the emissions gap report from the IPCC report is that the assumptions underlying the scenarios regarding how quickly and how much we can scale up and use negative carbon technologies were much more realistic, I would say, than new technologies, and that resulted in emissions need to go down much faster than previously assumed. So you can say the gap this year is large, especially with 1.5 degrees, but mainly because there are more cautious assumptions regarding how we can use new technologies, how quickly and how much. One of the key findings this year, or one of the key messages coming out, is also that we've seen that after having stabilized for about 3 years, from 2014 to 16, we saw that globally CO2 emissions went up again in 2017, and as we saw with the new studies coming out last week, it looks like they will increase even more in 2018. So that's a bad sign. We had hoped that maybe emissions were peaking or showed signs of slowing down. So they don't do that. Globally, we see no signs of peaking either. When we look at the projections based on countries' current policies, but also on the NDCs, they still project emissions globally will continue to increase even out to 2030. So that's posing some great challenges. So what we see basically is that the NDCs do lower emissions, of course, and we can also see that if we compare current policies, what countries are currently putting in place, it has resulted in bringing emissions down to where they would have been otherwise, but it's far from sufficient. So it's a first step, but it's not enough, and the overall main message of that report is really that we need to do much more and we need to do it much faster. So we really have the next 12 years to turn the ship around, to get emissions to peak and to significantly reduce them in order to have a good chance of keeping global temperature increase at a manageable level. Then we look at each year, we look into different topic areas of how we can actually achieve these emissions reductions. And what is important to highlight is that last year we had a big chapter looking at the sectoral emission reduction potential, and it shows that that is significant and it's sufficient to actually bridge the emissions gap. So it is possible to do so, and we already see a lot of countries making progress, putting in place policies that, if they were scaled up and applied across countries, would bring us down significantly, at least towards 2 degrees, and the technical potential is there to go even further down. This year we include a chapter on the role of innovation, how innovation can maybe be accelerated to help bridging the gap. We include a chapter that looks into fiscal policies, and especially on carbon pricing and the role of using that much more than we do today. And then we have a big chapter looking at non-state actors and subnational actors and how they can contribute to bridging the emissions gap report. And that was pre-released in time for the Global Climate Action Summit in San Francisco. So that's very briefly on the emissions gap report. Then, since 2014, together with UN Environment, we've been producing adaptation gap reports as well. And they're much more tricky to define because we don't have one metric to assess adaptation and measure adaptation progress. But basically, they also look into where we headed and what can countries do to beef up their adaptation efforts and to make populations and their countries more resilient and less vulnerable to climate change. So then we basically look at the difference between the current level or the future level of adaptation efforts in specific areas and what would be needed in order to minimize the adverse effects of climate change on specific topics. So in the first report that came out in 2014, we put forward a preliminary framework for looking at adaptation gaps, and then we tried to look at 3 areas. So we included knowledge gaps, we looked at finance and costs, and then we looked at technologies. And this year we have a focus on health in the second part of the report. What is the adaptation gap in health globally? And we also have a first part that starts informing, or at least intends to inform more on what you can call the baseline. If we want to assess progress towards the global goal of adaptation, of enhancing resilience and reducing vulnerability and building up adaptive capacity, how do we go about that? And since we don't have a firm target for this global goal, we need one way of tracking progress is to look at baselines. So where are we now, what are the trends, and how will they develop over time? So this year we're looking into 3 areas. We're looking into what is the governance frameworks that countries have in place for responding to climate change, and what laws and policies in particular do they have in place, what is reported to in this context under the UNFCCC. And then we look at adaptive capacity, and we've been assessing the existing vulnerability indices that are out there, and that some of them which have quite a long time period where they've been assessing different types of indicators. So we basically didn't just take the overall index, but we disaggregated it and looked at the adaptive capacity components. And what that shows is basically that although low-income countries are catching up, they're catching up very slowly compared to high-income countries. And we also see that these adaptive capacity indicators are hugely overlapping with what we would usually use as normal good development indicators. So I think it once again confirms the strong interlinkages between sustainable development and climate change adaptation. And finally, we do an update on the cost and finance aspects of adaptation that show, I would say, this previous findings that adaptation costs are likely to be much higher than the global estimates out there right now by 2030 and 50, and even now today. But also provide some new information on the cost of implementing and of climate proofing investments and so forth that further bring up costs of adaptation. So those are the key points.
Thank you very much, Annie. You saw from the mitigation gap perspective, and also what the Paris Agreement considers is that nationally determined contributions. So all countries, as you know, are working on that and getting prepared or making business plans or identifying emissions reduction opportunities. So UN Environment, together with us, are also going to help additional 10 countries to do that, and my colleague Leon is going to tell us a little bit more about the support we will be providing.
Thank you, Leon. UDP has been conducting energy support project in the past few years, and what was that with the support from UNEP DTU and also GSP Global Support Program under the name of INC support, we worked with developing countries to help them prepare the INC report to submit before the COP Paris. So 36 countries participated, and out of 35 countries submitted their INDC before Paris COP. And then after that, in phase 2, Danish government added their hands for support. And then in phase 2, beyond preparation of the INDC, we work together to help the countries implement their NDCs and also institutionalize the whole process of preparation and implementation of NDC for regular update. Then, in parallel, we have been running the INDC help desk, and through that, stakeholders send their questions, and then we answer those questions. And for this help desk, it's accessible to everybody, not only to participating countries, but also beyond participating countries. Along with all these implementation on the side, we have been conducting some analytical works, producing guidebooks on such as steps and processes to be helped to prepare INDC report, and also how to institutionalize all these NDC preparation and implementation process, and also MRD to track progress of NDC implementation and then update afterwards. Then that was passed in the column, and one upcoming NDC support project is to help implementation of NDCs participating countries in line with their national development agenda as well as global goals. It would be carried out over the next about 4 years, and then 10 participating countries will be joining this pact. This NDC, together with other initiatives such as TNA on technology and ICAD and CVAG on transparency, we expect they synergize each other. For instance, NDC helps countries to identify gap in the implementation and monitoring, so that transparency get enhanced. And on the other hand, transparency can help countries to identify the gap in the process of their implementation. And we expect the same synergy between TNA and transparency initiative, and also in this implementation and technology initiative.
So that more or less responds to this comprehensive capacity building framework we have. So we tried our capacity building approaches are coordinated and also have linkages. So the technology needs assessment as well help countries to do planning with regards to what technologies they have available in order to also make linkages with NDC implementation. But I have my colleague Sarah who will tell us more about it.
Thank you, Miriam. Well, UNEP DTU Partnership has supported more than 80 developing countries since 2009 in developing their technology needs assessment under the global GEF-funded project, the TNA project. We are working with country teams through a country-driven process. Countries become part of the project by requesting to join, and based on those requests, we collect a group of countries who are then preparing their technology needs assessment at the same time. So we are working with building up capacity in the countries, so enabling the national teams to prepare their technology needs assessments and their technology action plans. So what are we talking about when we talk about TNAs and technology needs assessments? It's a tool for the countries to identify their needs within climate change adaptation and mitigation. So they identify what we call climate technologies to help them move towards solving a specific challenge and reaching certain aims that they would like to use their technology needs assessment for. So the national teams are, through a stakeholder-driven process and driven by the national governments in the countries, working towards finding not only the technologies that they see as needed, but also to identify the enabling framework conditions that are needed for further diffusing and uptake of their technologies. And that's very much what is essential to the TNA process as such. So we take as a starting point in the first step, we support countries in identifying their needs, and when they have these priority needs within the technologies areas, they move on to identifying what are the barriers and what are the enabling conditions that actually make the technology work in their local context. Then as a final step, countries prepare their technology action plans, which are often referred to as the results of the TNAs. And the technology action plans not only outline the technologies identified, but very much focus on more of a programmatic approach for the different actions that are required to make the technology diffusion and uptake successful. So the technology action plans identify the different actions, but they also identify the financial needs to actually make the enabling conditions and the framework. So I would also say that the TNAs are not only about identifying technology needs, but also the financial needs in terms of their key technologies. To support the countries, we're working with regional centers of expertise, because we cover actually both countries in Asia and the Pacific, in Africa, in Latin America, Caribbean, and we work with regional centers in all the regions. So we ensure that we have the regional expertise also to support the countries and to build capacity within the national teams and make them able to prepare their TNAs. And through the project, we support countries providing methodologies, providing training for regional workshops, and as a research-based institution, we use the research that we do and translate those into methodologies and guidance tools to the countries, and facilitate this learning, and not only to the national teams from UNEP DTU and the regional centers, but we also facilitate the exchange of learning and experience sharing through our regional workshops. And we see countries are building networks around technology transfer in the regions throughout the TNA process. One of the outcomes of the TNA process is that throughout the technology action plans, which identify technology needs, financial needs, capacity building needs, etc., we also see countries to an increasing extent are building proposals for example, the Green Climate Fund, which actually acknowledges the TNAs as a country-driven process and the results coming from it as a national priority, and hence sees an argument for why this country actually presents a specific project proposal. Besides that, we also see that countries who already had a TNA at the time where they prepared their INDC and later NDC, more than 70% of the countries used the information of the TNAs to feed into their NDCs. Now that we are working with a new group of countries starting up these months,
which are LTCs and SITs. All of them will use their TNAs to feed into updating their NDCs to inform how they actually reach their targets and what they require in terms of support in the different areas that are a priority for them. So this is what we do with the technology ecosystem.
Thank you very much, Sarah. And just to complement this sets of projects, we also are working with countries to help them implement the enhanced transparency framework of the Paris Agreement. And as you know, transparency is one of the backbones of the Paris Agreement. So, but even before the Paris Agreement, the Center has conceptualized a support program for transparency, and that was looking at more MRB systems in the countries. So we are currently working with a number of other partners on an initiative called Initiative for Climate Action Transparency, with funds from two public donors, Germany and Italy, and two private donors, the Children's Fund Foundation in the UK and Climate Works in the US. So this is also a nice demonstration of how public and private donors come together and help support building capacities for transparency. So ICAT is working with developing impact assessment methodologies. 5 of them are looking at the GHG impact in 5 sectors. We have the methodologies are looking at policies, for example, in renewable energy, in buildings and efficiency, the forestry sector, agriculture, and so on. And this GHG impact assessment guidebooks are being complemented by sustainable development impacts of projects and policies and actions. There is one for looking at non-state actors' contribution also to emission reductions. And the other one is looking at the non-state actors, I said. And 2 other process guidebooks looking at process-oriented methodology. By applying these methodologies, what we have seen in countries that they are very interested in using the methodologies, but most of them are still lacking information with regards to data and information that the methodologies most of them are data intensive. And what we see usually in working with countries in this area is that one important aspect of using information has been lacking for almost over 25 years of existence of the convention, which is lack of availability of data. You know that for countries have been working with the national inventories, national communications, and all that process had been so far ad hoc, depending on funds from GEF. What we are trying to do now with the Enhanced Transparency Framework is to help them to institutionalize those processes. So data is put available, and there is existing institutions in countries are engaged with that instead of putting in place new institutions for that. Use, for example, the capacities and the infrastructure of the national statistical institutes to bring on board and make them somehow to manage data and help put available this information so the climate change focal points can easily use those data to do the national communications of the PORs, etc. At the same time, climate change policy makers can use those data to improve the policies, to do more informed data-based policies, and also they can assess these impacts of the policies in different sectors. Working with countries on developing capacities for this MRB system. So what is the rationale behind the transparency is that countries need to put together infrastructure in the countries to support the transparency. So these systems intend to help countries to see what they have done in transparency from the bottom up, and maybe complement with some sort of legal instruments to back them up and make the activities mandatory, kind of, or some institutions may have the power of enhancing the policies and enforce. So they can produce information from the very basics in the different sectors. For example, use municipalities or in sectors in the countries for them to report to the ministries or bigger national authorities for the municipalities, and all of them will form some sort of framework to gather this information so they can aggregate, they can process, and they can inform to this climate change focal points or whoever is dealing with the reporting to the Secretariat. So there is a generic framework also we have developed in that sense. That's with ICAT. We are working in around 35 countries now. We are also supporting the capacity building initiative for transparency that is being implemented by the GEF. Currently, we are supporting around 15 countries to develop their proposals for the CVAG. And in most of these countries, we are also working with ICAT. So what's all the activities that we have been able to identify through ICAT, the countries are putting in their proposals to the GEF. So with more bigger monies, countries may have the bigger capacities and also the means in order to implement the ideas that have been developed through ICAT. So we are working, making these links and coordination between ICAT and the CVAG. We are also helping the CVAG to develop more hands-on training methods in different aspects that we have identified through the projects. We are implementing the CVAG Global Coordination Platform as well, which is a website, but it's not only one more website. It's a very interactive website where you can also have the opportunity of participating in forums and interact with countries working with CVAG. It is a coordination platform in order for all relevant stakeholders engaged with capacity building for transparency can interact and exchange experiences and have the opportunity to see also how countries are implementing, which areas they are looking in the countries. And there is not only information on the projects, but also who you can contact in the countries. And the most important aspect maybe of this coordination platform, apart from putting people together and coordinate actions, is a tool we have put there for countries to be able to assess their needs and capacities for transparency. So it's a questionnaire consisting of around 100 questions put in different areas. So countries can respond and we process the information and we say how countries are doing in terms of transparency. So this coordination platform is also supported again by the GEF, and it's something that GEF is putting a little bit of funding on the country proposals so they can put the information in this website. So it's interactive because all participating countries in the CVAG can put information after having had access from us that are managing the website. So in the presentation we are going to be with the organizers that potentially will be uploaded in the website of the Paris Committee on Capacity Building. We have more information there, so we hope that our audience can have access to those information and also help us implement and participate and visit us on those websites. Thank you.
Thank you, Miriam.